Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is December 10, year 2023. It is 4 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome one, welcome all. And we have a couple of people here in the chat room, one from Southern California, Ms. Ruby. And we have a familiar name, familiar figure in the chat room. You're welcome to chime in, everybody else. I'm going to try to, now that I know of this feature, I'm going to try to bring people into the conversation a little bit more. I'll try to make a conscientious effort to include some commentary here because more often than not, I found some really interesting leads and comments, commentary, glosses on what I'm saying. I have a better than average, I like to think, audience, right? Most of the knuckleheads have gone somewhere else. But in spite of that, I would like you to, as we're gearing up here, to subscribe to the channel if you're on UB. And a lot of what I'm telling you here is going to presuppose some pre-knowledge of the material here. It's not difficult. It's just that it's not taught at the university, not taught formally. That's the primary motivation for me going public on TubeU, despite its limitations. And for that purpose, you might want to check my playlist, even though it seems to be suppressed, but check older shows. I've been doing this for over 2.5 years now, going on my third year. And I have a pretty good backlog or not a backlog, but a library, let's call it, of talks that go back almost 3 years now. And I'll mention some of them as I go along here. Ideally, I should put the links in there below, but I don't want you to get distracted here. And you can do that search for yourself. I think you'll be richly rewarded. Just as an example, I'm going to be talking about today, primarily drawing from this hefty book. It's titled Palo Alto. It has a psychedelic color scheme. I just figured that out because the author, I read an interview by the author. I often do that for preparatory purposes. Is into the microdosing psychedelic world, kind of, even though he is not really big on that famed author, Ken Kesey. Remember the author, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Which I visited, by the way, up in Oregon on the way up to Seattle, the hospital there. And it has a plaque about the filming of the classic movie starring Jack Nicholson, Louise Fletcher, and Ken Kesey of the Merry Pranksters and the Acid Kool-Aid Test, as Tom Wolfe described it in one of his great little pieces. I think that started out in the old Rolling Stone before it went total globalist. And, some of the backstory. And again, this is one of those instances where I assume that most of the viewers here know a little bit about Ken Kesey and his relationship to Stanford University and his study there in creative writing, so-called, and which transformed him into a novelist, I suppose. He only did 2 or 3 books. Sometimes a Great Notion, I think, was his first one. Cuckoo's Nest, which you already mentioned, and what else? There's one other book that I'm missing. I can't remember, but you can. So it slips on my mind at the moment, but you can add it here down below if you're willing to expend the energy. So this book is full of such tidbits, more than tidbits. These are very important research themes that he brings. But the author, I should give him credit. His name's Malcolm Harris. And I will tell you at the outset that found this book several months ago. It was published in 2023 by Little Brown. It's a mainstream trade publisher. It's not one of these indie presses, which do a great job, by the way. Don't get me wrong. or self-published deals. It's a major house, and I mention this is because the publishing history of this type of work is important in assessing where it's coming from. Right, we can assess its value so far as the content itself is concerned, but as we're going to find out here, a lot of what we are reading, seeing, listening to, even tasting, of course, and interacting with is engineered, right? And it comes from a identifiable source. And this is like, my above average viewership know this. So you know the usual suspects, right? And you also know from watching my previous talks, including one I gave on Stanford, the founders of Stanford University, which is Leland Stanford, the railroad magnate based here in Sacramento, California. All right. And later governor of California, and his wife, who was into the mystical arts, Jane Stanford, who was murdered. She was poisoned. I gave a talk on that. It talks a little bit more in depth about the circumstances of her death. One of the main books of that storyline was written by a retired Stanford professor. So once he got tenured in and went through his promotions and is safely pensioned off, he could write the truer story. I don't know if it's a definitive story of Stanford. And the reason I mention this is because the Stanford University we see today is a far cry from what either Leland Stanford envisioned or his wife. She was more into peace, harmony, humanity. As I mentioned before, she was attracted to a lot of the late 19th century, early 20th century ideas of her time, which were influenced by Vedanta or Paramahansa Yogananda type, not specifically that particular thinker, but Eastern philosophy. Let's just call it Eastern philosophy. In the same way with well, she didn't found it, but she outlived her husband. We're talking about Phoebe Hearst at the University of California, right, which is north of Stanford University, with Stanford University being the heart of so-called Silicon Valley or DARPA Valley, or as one book has it, Surveillance Valley, right? And I'm saying this as a prelude to have you understand a little bit more fully the complexities of putting a book like this together. And the author, Malcolm Harris, should be applauded for his efforts there. But that doesn't mean to say that the book is not without its flaws. Again, it's published by Little Brown. I've read interviews with Malcolm Harris, and my main reservation is that where does he come from? Where does Malcolm? I mean, literally, he comes from Palo Alto. He talks about his own roots, and he's very self-conscious about writing about Native Americans or Indians. He's very conscientious about the proper nomenclature, or African Americans or blacks with a capital B or a small b. He does include, for wonder of all wonders, he includes Asian Americans, or as I call them, yellows, right? Because Asian American is a official government term, census term. But I use the term yellow, just like black, all right, or white. So he comes from that milieu, yet he professes to be a communist, right? Communist along the line of certain writers of previous decades, from the 20s and 30s, Depression era, Grapes of Wrath type California, and up until more recent radicals, communists like Mike Davis, who wrote The Great City of Quartz, also a great book, but from a hard left perspective, Mike Davis. So, my question was like, how do you grow up in Palo Alto and become a communist, or are you a communist? And I'm still pondering the question that I imposed on myself. But in my professional experience, I found that a lot of communists, so-called, a lot of social democrats or democratic socialists or leftists, and definitely the majority of progressives come from high-born class. They're usually the part of what you would think was the class enemy, right? And that's important in today's discussion, because this Stanford University in Palo Alto is a larger community, which is largely a construct, I think, of the Pentagon/NATO, or the, if you prefer, the national security state. Um, this this it's more than an enclave. It's part of San Jose, I guess, conurbation, which I believe is around the eighth largest. San Jose is the city. It's about the eighth largest city in the United States. But the mythos of Silicon Valley is such that gets occluded, that its relationship to this larger city, and the mythology also has it that Palo Alto stands alone, right, above all California cities, all U.S. cities. It's an entity of itself. In a way, it's true because it's really a product of this larger social, corporate, military industry, all the different contractors in that area that we know today as Silicon Valley. All right. With that introduction, I'm also going to warn you that, and some of you prefer this. Let me see who else is in the chat room here. Commies are also, hey, that's good. I didn't read it. I just kind of put that, clicked it on Smooth Moves in at random, and it's certainly true at Stanford University. They control both ends, right? You know the concept of the controlled opposition and full spectrum dominance. These are all phrases that are near and dear to us who look at this. And Corky is talking about the hidden Tartarian history, possibly so. If you like, you can check the previous talks for. I think they were taken down though. They view him as a threat. This is a guest I had on 2 or 3 times, Jamie Lee, who has a whole book on Tartaria, which you can get on his website. I think he offers it for free. I have a hard copy, however. It's an excellent book. Whether you agree with his interpretation or not, I also have it on good authority that the state of California is very much controlled and dominated by the Vatican via the family, La Familia Farnese, who yielded 2 or 3 popes, right? The Vaticano. And one of their offshoots of the Farnese is Fidel Castro. And Castro is a really popular and common name in Califas or California. So, and there again, there's another fake communist for you, Fidel Castro, El Guapo, right? And I mention this because Stanford University is in a process now of trying to minimize the Asian enrollment and influence and try to bring up the Black people and the Latinos. But the Latinos have been a part, especially Mexicans and Californios, from the very beginning, almost the very beginning when Stanford University was known as Stanford College, Stanford Junior after Leland Stanford Junior College. What's his name? He became, I think, Secretary of State. He went to one of the local Jesuit high schools here in Sacramento, which means sacrament, by the way, and or sacrifice. I don't know. Human sacrifice. Leland Stanford famously presented his younger son, Junior, in a little platter to his friends. He was a railroad magnate. It's kind of like early spirit cooking. That's his anecdote that really stuck in my mind in reading about the murder of Jane Stanford. And by the way, I've neglected to mention one of the chief suspects in her murder through rat poisoning or cyanide. I don't know the exact chemical compound. One of the chief suspects was David Starr, Starr Jordan, right? I think he was the very first president of Leland Stanford Junior College, recruited from Backy's. I think he met Johns Hopkins. And I'll be talking about him without trying to be redundant from all the work you already have read. But anyway, I mentioned that the university would have been quite different had Jane Stanford been able to implement her vision, but she came to loggerheads with Dr. David Starr Jordan and Jordan Wan, probably by, well, then I won't say probably, there's a good chance that he was involved in some fashion with her untimely death. And then it became the technocratic center controlled by the Pentagon slash NATO and all its contractors, including at the early stage, such well-known household brands as Hewlett Packard. You know all that history, so I'll try not to cover that again. But that's David Starr Jordan, and most of you know that at that point in time, this was not just Stanford University, but there was a national movement in all the universities. It wasn't a movement; it was institutionalized. There was an institutionalized belief in racial fitness. You might call it social Darwinism. And certainly, David Starr Jordan represented that mainstream school of thought within American social sciences and hard sciences. And I would argue that they maintain that even to the present day, even though the terminology has changed or certain diversionary tactics have been put into play to take our focus, our attention away from. We are still dealing with a process of population control, not just in total numbers, but also manipulation and engineering, cultural, social, political, economic control. And that's an observation that, of course, Harris makes here in his book Palo Alto, but he does it from a pretty predictable new leftists, like 60s, 1960s, a new left Mike Davis type of. I think he views himself as the successor to Mike Davis. From that sort of perspective, a new left perspective, and unlike myself, does not look at Palo Alto as an arm, if not the arm, probably the brains of the Pentagon world order, the NATO world order. I call it UNATO, which conflates United Nations and NATO. He doesn't want to either. He doesn't want to go there, which is why he gets to publish with Little Brown, and I get to speak to you. And I'm not complaining. I really appreciate your support here. Um, I get to speak to you in a oh, Corky has the book, Who Killed Jane Stan? Thank you very much. See, it's really useful for me to kind of patch you guys in here. I'll leave it up there so you can check it. It's fascinating. If you like true crime in general, this is something that you'll find riveting. And these stories, if I can digress for a moment, are not unique to Stanford University. You'll be surprised, because I study it. You'd be surprised how many murders and killings and accidents, quote unquote, take place in a university or a college setting. And I think it was Steve Quayle, the independent researcher, who I don't know if he's updated the list, but he's has this running list or had a running list of researchers, scientists, intellectuals attached to universities, mostly in the biosciences, who befell a strange fate. And typically they were sitting on some sort of revolutionary discovery or a patent, something like that. Um, so, but anyway, read the book. You'll find it fascinating, and you also might read the book by Maury Terry. I know that some people do have just tried to discredit him, but there's a section that opens up his book on Son of. It's the only one he wrote on Son of Sam, which takes place at the Memorial Chapel at Stanford University, which is the brutal ritualistic murder of Arliss Perry, right? And that's a landmark on the campus there. I've already mentioned, I've at least alluded to the fact that Leland Stanford Jr., the boy, was presented as sort of on a platter, on a silver platter, literally, to the colleagues of Leland Stanford Sr. He died at a young age, by the way. He died overseas, and I don't think there was ever an autopsy. Was he a child sacrifice? I don't know. One can only speculate. So then they named the university after the dearly departed son. So anyway, check out my earlier talks on that to get the backstory. Right. Let me see my own little notes that I have for you. That yeah, I forgot to mention that I was going to uh, integrate my own personal stories of Stanford University. Yes, I've been there many times. I've even given a talk there, not at the Hoover Institution, which is the iconic structure in the campus that is used as the pick here for this talk here. That's the Hoover phallus, or the Hoover Tower, named after President Herbert Hoover, who had a bunch of books and papers and research that he stored there, and they from there built on and I'll show you in a moment, uh, a a think tank, I guess you would describe it. It's called the Hoover Institution. That's alive and well today, and it's yielded any number of policy intellectuals and hacks alike, not just in the social and the human sciences, but also people in the cabinet, up to the cabinet level. Herbert Hoover, I think, was in the first class of Stanford, Leland Stanford Junior College. So he was a homeboy, but people like Condoleezza Rice, I don't know if anybody remembers it, yeah, but she came out of the faculty of Stanford. I think she's back there now, and on and on. So it rose to prominence. It didn't really start taking off until David Starr Jordan probably cut some deals with his friends back east, in the DC area, and I think he came from Johns Hopkins, however, Baltimore, um, and said, "Hey, this is the wave of the future," meaning Asia, East Asia. And I mention that is because the campus is full of Asian people, Asians and Asian Americans, or yellow people. Just call them generically, including one that you might not know. You might not know anything about Stanford University or Palo Alto, but most likely you will know the name Jeremy Lin, Lin. Remember Lin Sanity with the New York Knicks? Yeah, he comes from Palo Alto. He went to Palo Alto High School. He was a member of the Vikings, the team that defeated the perennial Southern California. It's Orange County, actually, Santa Ana, which is the county seat of Orange County. Another overlooked military industrial conurbation, Orange County. People up, especially up in Northern California, like, oh, Orange County, it's Disneyland. You guys are wrong, man. There's a reason why Philip K. Dick went down to Orange County. I think he was sent down there because it's kind of like Silicon Valley, but it's without the glamour and the glitz and the hype. So I'm looking at Orange County, which I lived there myself for several years, and I went to UC Irvine for my doctoral work, and know it very well. And undergraduate, I was at Long Beach, which is one of the two major ports in Los Angeles, Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, a huge military complex, and much larger than that of Silicon Valley. I'm just mentioning this as an aside. But Mater Dei played, they're a Catholic school, so they can recruit all the best guys over 6'6" to get on their team, regardless of where they live. Right? It's a Division One CIF, not Division One. I think it's five division. The top tier. And they played Jeremy Lin's team up in the Palo Alto, which is mostly white kids, right? As Jeremy Lin himself, because I watched a lot of documentaries lately on him, the Lin Sanity deal. He went to school mostly with. He lived in a white community. He belonged to a church, probably Taiwanese American Christian, I believe, um, with all Asians, co-ethnics, and then he played ball with all blacks. So he had these tricolor scheme in his whole career, yet he was the target of all kinds of racial invective, calling him coronavirus, or said, "Man, your eyes are so slanted. How can you even see the scobo?" Right? And these were blacks. These were Negroes who were baiting him. They were race baiting him. which makes sense because, blacks are overrepresented in the military, which has been overseas in Asia, riding herd uh, on Asian people, including Okinawa, which I lived in for a year, South Korea, you name it. Or as one, I think might have been Dick Gregory. I don't know who to attribute the joke to, but they said, yeah, you got the black man fighting for the white man, defending the land that was stolen from the red man to kill the yellow man, right? And on it goes. So I thought it's kind of interesting that Jeremy Lin came into my came back into my consciousness when I was preparing for this talk. And as I told you or warned you just previously, a few minutes ago, I'm going to interject some of my own personal anecdotes about Stanford. In the height of Lynn's sanity, here goes. In the height of Lynn's sanity, a group of female Asian American self-identified, that's what they told me. They're a group of Asian American female psychiatrists at Stanford University Hospital. And they wanted me as an expert on media because I've written 2 or 3 books on and one specifically on Asian American. I'm a known person, as Muddy Waters used to put it. His phrase, I wanted to be a known person. Well, I became a known person in the media. So they knew about me. They wanted me to drive all the way down to Stanford. It's not really that far, but my time's valuable too, right? They wanted me to drive down and indulge them in their excitement that the Asian American, because there was Chinese like Yao Ming and a couple of others that made it into the NBA, but not a Chinese born in America, Taiwanese more specifically, and that was Justin Lin. He was born here to parents who were the scientific engineering class of people that were being brought in from Taiwan specifically post 1965 because the United States was not educating their young people fast and quickly enough and to fill the ranks of this growing technocracy. So they were slotted into there, and it's only natural that they would wind up in Silicon Valley. I have to look further back into their family background. Jeremy Lin himself plays it down, but because he says he's from Northern California, and that's a pretty large region. He won't say Palo Alto because when you hear Palo Alto, you're thinking, oh, you're a rich mother. You one of them privileged, uh, fresh off the boat Asians who come with tons of money and buy these giant mansions there. And by the way, that's the bulk of the people who are buying these huge homes in old Palo Alto. This is Chinese nouveau riche. Said, wow, this is a bargain. We're gonna buy it up. So, I can understand some of the resentment of the black people. He says, my God, you know, John Chinaman. By the way, they came to a conflict of freed black slaves and Chinese at the end of the Civil War. In fact, that's why Chinese were brought in before the door was shut on them to replace the free black labor that was liberated, quote unquote, by Abraham Lincoln, right? So they had to bring a John Chinaman in. So they had some battle. They also fought with the Irishmen, who were free men, but they were getting put out of the way. They're being undercut by the Chinamen. And I'm telling you this is because this is all the political backdrop, not the backdrop, it was the foreground of all David Starr Jordan's emphasis on eugenics and the people that he hired, including Terman, right? Terma, Lewis Terman, who was very much involved with fetishizing so-called intelligence quotient, right? You've heard of the Stanford-Binet test, right? Stanford isn't Stanford College or Stanford University now. And Binet is the Frenchman who came up with the scale, supposedly measuring intelligence. But as we know by now, and by the way, a lot of these standardized tests are being dropped because of the critiques of these people I'm talking about who are stone cold eugenicists, including Shockley, who I'll talk about in a moment, and some other people that you might not know about, right? So it's the supreme irony that you have all that Stanford is doing their darnest to try to recruit black non-athletic students to the university and dropping objective measures of academic and scholarly and intellectual attainment, and also Latinos or first generation college graduates, they're called. I have a story about one prominent Mexican American that I know personally through my father, who comes out of Stanford. And I'll mention him in a moment before I finish. And the supreme irony is that the Stanford is overrun by Asians and Asian Americans, Asian nationals, and what I call yellow people. Um, and that shouldn't be such a surprise to Jane Stanford, because she liked that. She liked the Orient. There was a whole Orientalist, um, I won't call it a fad, but amongst women of her upper class, they like the chinoiserie or japonoserie. They like to collect the little gewgaws from the Orient. Some of them were not Jane Stanford, but some of them were part of missionary families, Methodists, for example, that went to Japan and started colleges and schools, educated and went to China, Yale in China, right? The same organization that recruited Mao Zedong, right? So it's not as easy to say, oh, there's just this anti-Asian racism. It was kind of a paternalism, the kind of paternalism that Henry Luce embodied. The guy that founded Time Magazine, Time Life, and was the founder of now what is just another media arm of the intelligence agency. That Henry Booth Luce, after he married Claire Booth, he was the son of a missionary family in China, so he had a very fond uh, relationship to China and so-called free China. Of course, he was rabidly anti-communist, and we know now that the communist versus free China was a fake dialect that was set up by our OSS and the intelligence people as part of the Anglo-American alliance, and that includes our British uh, cousins. Are right? I use that with supreme irony. We're going to get to some of these cousins in a moment. I'm going to show you a clip featuring, it's an edit, features Francis Stoner Saunders and Hugh Willett. They're both British subjects who write about the CIA or have written about the CIA, but they won't. They're doing it, I think, primarily to deflect attention from the people who were champions at the mindfuck operation of the world, right? The colonial world, going back to the British East India Company and up to the present. And we know them by the initials such as MI5, SIS, Special Intelligence Service, or MI6. And I gave a whole talk on Ian Fleming, right? So you can refer to that if you're a newbie to this channel. I read every single one of the reissued Ian Fleming books that had to do with not just James Bond. I also read Shitty Shitty Bang. I read the whole thing. It's a uniform edition, and I gave a talk based on that. So you can check that out. Jean Le Carre, or Carre, you might pronounce it. Also a really good former, quote unquote, former intelligence agent. And I gave a talk on, I've mentioned him more than once, Gordon Thomas, he wasn't with MI, I don't think, or a special branch, but he got a lot of information from them and wrote these incredible books on people like, uh, the granddaddy of the Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the Mossad and all these other not so shadowy anymore, independent journalists and even YouTubers have popularized these names and understandings. So I'm not going to go over those grounds again. Let me click someone in real quick at random. Wentai, the correspondence with the LCE to cheat. It's been Hunter Biden walking free. Okay, what's the LCE? Is Hunter going to skate? Yeah, I think he probably will, but he's under indictment for tax cheating. We'll have to see. Yeah, Justin Lin. Well, I'm sorry, not he's the director, the Jeremy Lin. And while we're on yellow people, did you hear about Otani Shohei? Otani. It's pronounced Otani, by the way, not Otani. 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 That's it's O-H. Otani, not O-T-A-N-I. Otani. Uh, just like it's not, you sound like Dennis Miller if you say bento box. Oh, I'm going to go to the store and buy myself a bento box. Oh my gosh. And I mention this is because there was one black player who took issue with the fact that Jeremy Lin was rocking the dreadlocks. He said, "Oh, that don't look good on no Chinaman. That's a black thing." And so Jeremy Lin fired back at him on Twitter and said, "Hey, man, what's up with them Chinese character tattoos on your arm?" So that shut him up. Anyway, Jeremy Lin is a good Christian guy. His faith in God and Jesus is unshakable, and it's helped him through the highs and the lows of his career. I didn't finish my thoughts on his parents. We have to check more into his background. I think his father might have been like a Connie Chung type situation. He might have been with intelligence, Taiwanese, or he might have just been a general um, electronic engineer, double E type person. But back then, when he first came to the country, Taiwan kept close tabs on those overseas Taiwanese with their intelligence. They were set up by CIA, by the way, and they worked very closely in making sure that there were no dissenters amongst these overseas intellectual labor, like Mr. Lin and others. He's just one example, and there are some cases where these people have been disciplined, some with political assassinations here in the U.S. And I already, look at my talk earlier. It wasn't on Connie Chung per se, but I talk about her and her father having been an intelligence officer for the Kuomintang in the Maryland, D.C. area. So this is something that our friend here, the author, Malcolm Harris, doesn't talk about. He misses it, or it's because he is from that milieu. I suspect the latter. You don't get a contract with Little Brown talking smack about a lot of characters we know and love, like quote unquote love, like Peter Thiel. You don't get to do that unless you're an insider, right? Like me, your butt's in trouble, man. My yellow butt got in trouble when I started talking about biotechnology, nanotechnology, primatology, and all the other ologies, sociology, anthropology, that were being used, and Stanford University of California, were being used to oppress uh, the minds of these students who didn't know any better. Right? I was teaching that stuff long before Malcolm Harris was doing it. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a folder on Professor Hamamoto because Janet Napolitano of the Department of Homeland Security later became UC president. Right. I think they sent her for a reason. They said, "Oh man, the natives are getting restless." So I'm one of them yellow people who they weren't able to co-opt or to subjugate, right? Because I was too stupid. I thought the university was a place where we tried to pursue the truth, no matter where it may lead. Man, I got a smart audience. Irish Chinese labor competition on the Transcontinental Railroad. Yeah. Rockefellers. Yeah, like pit them against each other. Man, if the Chinese and Irish ever got together, we'd be living in a much different country. We might be living in a country that had its own sovereign national bank, right? Instead of being run by the private Federal Reserve. There's all kinds of possibilities, right? And thank you for that comment. And that's the reason why these universities exist, right? Um, it was brought back home to me again. The Hoover Institution is the home to what it might be referred to as the violence industries, because one of the retired generals And they're always giving expert commentary on these indie channels. But they're retired generals. They have some kind of not only their pension, but they have some kind of relationship with corporations. No, usually as consultants or whatever, advisors. But H.R. McMaster, Lieutenant General, war hero, supposedly, he's back at Stanford University at the Hoover Institution. Well, let's take an opportunity to look at him right now. You'll see who I'm talking about. And he has a book coming out. I'll probably read it. And it's you know what military does? It's there to kill people and blow up shit. That is their charge. Okay, they're not here to protect anybody. This is his argument with military. This is his comment in this clip here, right from the Hoover Institution where he's housed. Right, we're not here to enslave the American people. Right, and the U.S. military, the federal troops, have periodically had to intervene. Like right after the Civil War, the federal troops had to be called in. Federal troops, the National Guard, had to call in to the University of Alabama to desegregate the university. So we need the universal policing, right, or our military. And the irony is that one of the panelists here that's being introduced by a Scotsman named Niall Ferguson. Why do I say Scotsman? Because recall that Adam Smith was Scotsman. Recall where the British East India Company, recall the Scottish Enlightenment. Okay, the Scots don't, be put off by the average white man who come from Scotland and deterred, being put off the scent there. But man, they're just mean, avaricious colonialists on a global scale. So Niall Ferguson is the descendant. Maybe not literally, but I see him as an intellectual heir. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. An intellectual heir of Adam Smith, who's in this play, who occupies a shot caller position at the Hoover Institution and the Anglo-American Advisory Network. That's Neil Ferguson, Niall Ferguson. He's introducing General H.R. McMaster, but in the panel, if you see this Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares configuration, but the African-American gentleman is Fryer. I think, what's his first name? Roland Fryer? Roland G. Fryer Jr. He's another story into himself. I should give a whole talk on Roland. I should give a whole talk on Black conservatives that are coming to the fore. And my question are those Black conservatives really conservatives, or are they just retread Black intellectuals that have been used as part of the Black bourgeoisie control mechanism put in by the people like the Rockefellers and Spelman College and the historically Black colleges and universities, of which Kamala Harris is a member. She's a member of a historically Black college, a sorority, right? So we'll have to see about Professor Roland Fryer. He's in trouble right now because there's a controversy at Harvard University about his. He got suspended for 2 years, so I kind of feel his pain because he was suspended without 2 years for 2 years from Harvard. He was the youngest African American tenured professor at Harvard University history. So he's no slouch intellectually. He's a statistician. He's a numbers man. And by the way, if people want to bring him down, they shouldn't attack him for his ideas. They should just go into his methodology. I guarantee you that the data acquisition and the interpretation is flawed, right? If not concocted, I'm not going to accuse him of that, but I've given talks before about the bogus cooking of the books and the numbers from all these guys who are supposedly mavens, that's a Yiddish word, mavens of data, right? Including the former president, the disgraced former president of Stanford University itself, right? Monsieur Marc Tessier-Levin, so-called neuroscientist, who's turns out his studies were bogus, as revealed by a Stanford undergraduate reporter. Those kids are smart, man. Those are smart. That's, you're recruiting and you've you've selected, you've handpicked all the great athletic talent, intellectual talent in the country and in the world. But watch out, man, because you're not going to be able to put much over them. This young man didn't get the memo that he's supposed to shut up about that kind of. If he wants a job in the future, he's got to play along. But I guess he was a newbie, so he didn't know any better. But he got, I tip my hat to him for his reportage. Let's see. Let me put something else here. Someone said something about Jesse Jackson. Such so much is yeah, I mean, wasn't it Mark Twain who said there's lies, damn lies, and statistics? All right, maybe that's something that Professor Roland Frye Jr. Should revisit, right? Because he says, "Oh, I'm driven by the data. I'm above politics. Nobody's above politics." Right, Jesse Jackson 2.0. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, D.E. Saccone. Jesse Jackson, yeah, wasn't he Boulay? He was some sort of a fraternity guy too. Uh, Man, it's a club and you ain't part of it, right? George Carlin, the great Irish American social thinker and parodist. Disraeli, yeah, he was a novelist, right? You read all those Victorian Edwardian novels, and I mention this because we're going to get into some of the cultural engineering. But first, I promised you I wanted to show you McMaster, H.R. McMaster. Right, he's in the house. He's housed in the Hoover Phallus, right there with these other bright thinkers, including Roland Fryer. And he got in trouble. I didn't finish the story. He got in trouble at Harvard because he was saying that black men, it's typically men who get in this kind of trouble, are less likely to die of violence at the hands of cops than white men. And he did it through statistical analysis and data collection from different parts of the country with a hand-picked research team that he sent out there that all wanted to work with Roland Fryer because it would look good on their curriculum vitae. And he got busted because it went against the orthodoxy, saying, "Oh yeah, racism, structural racism." His argument's more subtle than that, so you can watch his material. Now you know who to look for and see what's going on at Harvard and Yale and all the other. And I don't know if this is a real fight or not, or it's just a cock up, right? But the heads of these institutions, the elite institutions, are getting flack from Congress, mostly Jewish members of Congress, saying that, hey, you better ride herd on your students and faculty and staff that are supporting Hamas and Palestinian rights. You better come down on the side of Israel, right, who gets all the money from the U.S. Congress. Secondly, Taiwan, by the way. That's why I mentioned the fact that the Lin family and all the scientists, engineers that came from Taiwan, or Connie Chung, that's no accident. That's part of this special relationship that the U.S. has with Taiwan. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that China wants to go in there and settle the score there, because that's the incubator. They see it as an incubator for the takeover of their enterprise on the mainland there. I'm oversimplifying. So let's take a look at H.R. McMaster. He said he's implying that the American people require martial discipline. MARTIAL. He doesn't go that far, say that, but think what the military. But this guy's no dummy, by the way. He has a, for what it's worth, he has a PhD. He has a doctorate. He's Dr. McMaster, Lieutenant General Dr. H.R. McMaster. Right. And I mention this because the military learned early on to start fusing and making nice with the university where all this dissent was coming from, aimed at the university, at the military complex. So I'd say, well, let's send them over to Harvard and Yale and let's get them PhDs and send them to school for free. And then they'll be part of the intellectual class. So McMaster is part of that more recent trend. When I say recent, it's the last 20 years or so. The other guy, David Petraeus, is also one of them retread military dudes who got PhDs in later career so that they can have some sort of intellectual, scholarly, administrative policy credibility. That's how I view it, right? So here is H.R. McMaster. You'll recognize him. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not it. Here we go.
Certainly not least is Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, the Hoover Institution's Fuad and Michelle Ajami Senior Fellow. Prior to returning to Hoover, he served as the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. General McMaster is also the author of a new book, Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World. It's coming out this fall, but you can pre-order it now. Hello, HR.
Hey, Neil, good to be with all of you, and welcome, Roland.
HR, I need to throw this to you now, because although your government job was as a national security advisor and your concern was with foreign threats to the United States, I know you've thought a lot about these issues. And of course, as a soldier, you were part of an army that has its own history of troubles with race relations and also its own evolving practice in the way that you deal with violence, organized and spontaneous. How do you think about this? And I've got one particular thing I want to ask you about, but let's just start with the general question of how the army, how somebody with a military background views a crisis like this.
Well, I think Roland and John's discussion about incentives is important, but what really strikes me as maybe even more important is organizational culture and how you affect organizational culture. And you can't really make direct parallels to the military. And of course, I never discouraged our soldiers from using overwhelming firepower in combat, but we do have the jus and bello principles of discipline and discrimination. And in particular, when you're in complex counterinsurgency environments, it's very important to separate the enemy from the civilian population and to, at times, take greater risk. Ask yourself.
Okay, that's Dr. H.R. McMaster. I'll probably find his book and read it used. Someone mentioned, I can't find the comment now. I put it up there and I can't find it. The print's too small. Mentioned Thomas Sowell. That's Sowell. Yes. Sowell recently, well, I don't know how recently, but he retired. He was a longtime fixture at Hoover Institution. And my prediction is that probably Roland Fryer is going to take the place of Thomas Sowell if things start to go south at Harvard University, who, by the way, has a black president right now. She was a cancel culture person. She was the one that came down on Roland Fryer for coming down on with information and data that didn't square with what the black bourgeoisie wants to hear, which is that of black oppression and structural racism against all people of color, especially blacks. Asians, they don't give a shit about, but blacks especially, right? Yeah, so now she's on the hot seat for not supporting Israel, the biggest recipient of so-called foreign aid from the U.S. taxpayer. So yeah, Thomas Sowell, you got that one right. Okay, I'm not just blowing smoke when I say I have above average viewers. It's true. I'm showing you everybody who's looking at the comments right here. But since I showed you a little bit of the cultural and engineering part segment, this clip I made, I'm going to run it because we're the time is beginning to expire here. And again, this features the work. And if you're one of my Patreon supporters, you'll get some excerpts of the books, classics, by the way. They should be in your library for both of these authors, respectively, Francis Stoner Saunders and Hugh Willits. The Hugh Willits is the mighty Wurlitzer, how the CIA played America. That was a phrase that one of the CIA people put together. Wurlitzer, Oregon, right? And the book by Stoner Saunders is definitely something that you need to read, because and we don't want you to err in the side of paranoia, but you'll see, and this is a poll, an informal poll I put on my recent Patreon entry. I asked if Taylor Swift was a construct of U.S. intelligence, and I got some really good information and good leads. Thank you very much to the Patreonistas. And so far, the consensus is that yes, she is, right? So we're not talking about the late 40s and the 1950s and 60s alone. We're not talking about American jazz being used as a form of quote unquote cultural diplomacy. We're talking about today. Now we're talking about the most profitable tour ever, the Eras tour by Taylor Swift. Seems like she comes from a banking family and an oil family. Right? She's not organic. She does not come from the grass. She's astroturf. She's not grassroots. Anyway, you'll find this clip. Well, you know this, but it'll reinforce what you already suspected or might already have read about.
Why are some of the biggest names in the culture of the West during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, why are they linked to the CIA? The CIA, for 20 years until their program was discovered, were secretly promoting certain artists and intellectuals and musicians and historians and philosophers and writers in a covert way as a kind of collective cultural NATO.
Americans wanted to stand for freedom. That was very much the cause, the slogan of the US Cold War effort. The US government didn't want to be seen to be controlling American artists and intellectuals.
The enemy wasn't actually really Moscow. The real enemy for the States, I think, were the people who were not yet convinced that this was the American century, that the Pax Americana was the best way to go forward.
The CIA plowed millions of dollars into the Congress for Cultural Freedom via fake foundations. Within a few years, Congress for Cultural Freedom was running arts festivals and publishing literary magazines, and staging conferences around the world. It also established national affiliates in nearly 40 countries.
There was no other organisation at the time that was comparable, except perhaps for the funding that the Soviet Union were giving to their own propaganda and psychological warfare outfits.
It was difficult art, it was impressive art. It gave the impression that the United States had this very successful high culture, which is something that many communists claimed it didn't. This is something that artists wouldn't have been doing in the Soviet Union, where socialist realism was the dominant cultural aesthetic, and artists seemed very sort of controlled, very regimented. I think many more had a pretty good idea that money was coming from the CIA. There were actual CIA officers sort of working undercover, helping run the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
There was a small unit of people who knew, and that included some of the intellectuals who were brought in on the secret. And they were the ones who were then getting their other intellectuals and artists and everybody conjoined to this, but without telling them the truth.
The British government started this trend of translating Orwell's novels like 1984 and Animal Farm and distributing them to foreign audiences. It was such good work. It was so readable. It was so accessible to foreign audiences. And the CIA, I think, noticed this and followed the British example.
In Hollywood, the CIA had a very secret sort of organization that was scouting films, looking around at the films that were in production and trying to insert positive racial stereotypes. Jazz was very interesting because, like abstract expressionism, it was the kind of thing that confused the Soviets. There were cultural orthodoxies in the Soviet Union and in its satellites, which, if they were broken by artists, there was immediate reaction from the Soviet authorities.
I think the CIA probably would have been very pleased with the results of its efforts in terms of how many Western intellectuals the Congress was able to rope into its activities and all of the conferences and festivals and literary magazines that came out of it. But long term, this always had the potential to sort of blow up in the CIA's face.
It wasn't a victory for culture, for literature, or for art, or for jazz, or for any other form of cultural or artistic expression, because in my view, that needs to exist and can only really breathe if it's not locked in some kind of embrace of the political institutions in which it finds itself. It's about reacting to and against those things. If it's being done properly, you're not going to know about it. But there's an acoustic sometimes that's wrong. Things emerge and they seem to be very well funded, and it's like, where did all this come from? Those are the things that I always look at and sort of wonder a bit. But be careful, because it can make you a bit paranoid.
Well, there are two major thinkers about the CIA engineering the soft side, the cultural expression of the post-war American society, trying to use, and there are standalone books about how different foundations have tried to use jazz, for example, um, during the height of the Cold War, to say that, hey, to the Soviet bloc, as it was called back then, race relations in America are not as bad as the Soviet masters are making out to be. Look at this great art form. Now, what these clips didn't show is that some of these African-American musicians themselves knew that they were being played, that they were being used. People like Louis Armstrong said, screw you, Ike, I'm not going to be there as your propaganda. He went a couple times. He went to different countries, not just Soviet bloc countries. And people like Dizzy Gillespie and some of the major names went on these tours, these goodwill tours. It's called cultural ambassadorship, right? There's still some of that going on to a certain extent, but a lot of them figured it out because it's been used time and time again, right? So when I say that, hey, Taylor Swift might be a lineal descendant of this type of programming, whether it's monarch per se, right, mind control or whatever it might be, it's very much consistent. It has all the earmarks of these other types of programs that have been put across through not just the American public, but to the world audience, right? And it's through the so-called new media, the social media, the people at the Silicon Valley mafia that help overthrow regimes culturally, politically. They help individuals like Donald Trump get elected to the presidency, and by the same token, they can destroy him, right? It should be remembered that Peter Thiel was a advisor to the Trump administration, and I kind of invoke him without being anti-Germanic, right, in the title of this talk, which was Palo Alto Über alles, because he is German. He was born in Germany. His parents left and went to South Africa, which was, I think, part of the destination points in these rat lines after the war. Not just Argentina. It wasn't just Dr. Mengele who went to Uruguay or Paraguay, but a lot of them went to South Africa, and the United States, of course. You already know about that through Paperclip and its related programs. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the continuity of this globalist agenda that never really ended at the conclusion of World War II. The difference with Palo Alto is that it's looking eastward. It's looking towards Asia. It's looking towards what Henry Luce, the head founder of Time, right, as I alluded to before, who was born in China of missionary parents, what they refer to as the Pacific Century, right? And this is how someone like Jeremy Lin's family comes to Palo Alto, along with tons of other scientists and engineers from East Asia primarily, and later South Asia, right? Indians, Sri Lankans, right? I had a girlfriend, by the way, who lived in Los Altos Heights, which is even more upscale than Palo Alto. In fact, from her house, we can go over to a little hill and look down and see Stanford University, right? That's how high up her father was an engineer as well. And you will see some, these populations there that are not the oppressed Maoists, and I didn't get a chance. I ran out of time here, but there was a whole Asian American or Yellow Power Maoist group that came out of Stanford University, and Malcolm Harris, who's a self-professed communist and radical, wrote pretty extensively about them. It's written about in some Asian American scholarship, but I'd never seen it in a mainstream book. And personally, I was wondered how do these and why do these people who came, they were yellows like me, came out of Stanford University, are raving Maoists. And you would think, okay, they're seen as political outliers and they didn't have any impact, but that's wrong. I came to my observations by seeing that they were running cultural organizations like the Asian American Film Festival, NATA, the National Association for Asians, and I consulted with them. I worked with them. I'm a scholar in media, and they saw me as an important resource until they realized that I was not a Maoist. And had left liberal sympathies. I studied with Professor Peter Klikak at UC Irvine, who was a student of Paul Baran at Stanford, who was a Marxist. And or Paul Sweezy, rather. Baran and Sweezy wrote a book called Monopoly Capital, which was published by Monthly Review Press, which was the American arm of a British Fabian or socialist, social democratic groups in the UK and the United Kingdom. So the point I'm making here is that the radicalism, whether it's social democracy or Maoism, is funded by the same sources. It comes from the same well as the masters. Okay, it comes from the same poisoned well, and that's the biggest revolution, amongst the most important lessons I learned in my professional career. There are all these conundrums that I was left baffling. So how can they be committing class suicide, as it used to be called? It's because they were from that class, right? And this is from my friend and colleague Kirby Summers, who's been doing a great job. I think it's up to 5 parts now on her Substack. You'll have to check it out because you can read it and go through it very carefully in a way that you can't by just a YouTube. And it makes you understand why someone like Eric Weinstein and a Brett Weinstein at Portland State College, how they appear and how they're related to the Jeffrey Epstein network. And, I've raised the name Jordan Peterson before. He is a suspect. He has all the earmarks of someone who is, in addition to being represented by Creative Artists Agency, as one of my patronistas pointed out, has all the earmarks of someone who is a controlled asset. And it turns out that Professor Peterson's daughter, forgot her name, she's half Russian, was being pimped out by this guy, Andrew Tate, who does all these webcam type shows. And so he's part of maybe not directly complicit, but he, through his daughter, is involved in this sort of sleazy sex industry. I don't know if you'd call it trafficking. I don't think so. But the webcam business is huge. Anyway, the larger point is that leave all these names aside. We can almost be assured, I won't say guaranteed, but we can be assured that all these characters who keep popping up, I call them pop-up pundits, who keep popping up, are controlled, and they have some sort of intelligence background or family that are high-level corporate, right? Time and time again. I don't say this out of resentment. I don't say this out of envy, because I had my career. I was at the University of California for over 20 years, and I made a pretty good contribution to the point where I was invited to talks to give at Harvard Law School or Stanford University, on, and Berkeley, whatever. I've been there. I've done that, okay? But I was never appointed a fellow at Hoover. They would never want me. They said, this guy is a loose cannon, man. We can't. We hired him because we thought he could be a yellow front man for us, right? He'd go along like Professor Roland Frye, right? Or Thomas Sowell, whoever else, like one of them Boule people or Jesse Jackson. All of those characters, man. Come on, get real. Anyway, that's my time for today. Let's see what's in the scoreboard here. Atlantic Council by okay, good. See, I'm picking these at random, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not cherry picking. I have really a really good audience. So get some of your friends who are equally as intelligent and well read and up on this stuff to subscribe and support me on Patreon as well. Because I have some lot of goodies. There you go. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. You know what this tells me? This tells me that these guys, Bill Gates on down, Peter Thiel, they're talking to themselves. It's just a giant circle jerk for them because we're not believing it. I mean, the people who are going to Taylor Swift concerts, it's like a triage. They're already dead, right? They're gone. So we can make fun of them and have, a little bit of laughs at their expense, but they're not players. All right. So on that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start prepping right away for the next talk. Oh, why you should subscribe and get notifications because I was in touch with someone who got back with me because I, like maybe a year ago, reached out to him and said, "Hey, I want you to be a guest on my show, and we're going to chop it up about the Beatles." And then he recently saw my talk that I gave on this Solid State, right, by Kenneth Womack. And he also sent me some information on the Mal Evans story on the Beatles, which I'm reading, haven't finished it yet. So he wants to do a collaboration on addressing what he calls the flat earthers about the Beatles being British, Anglo-American, let's say, intelligence creations, right? Again, that goes contrary to what I've told you about in Francis Stoner. But I'm saying this at the end so that we do not make the extreme mistake, at the other extreme of saying that everybody's a fabrication, everybody's a faux Beatles, everybody's the prefab for everything's fake, right? Like in a lyric, a line from the Glass Onion, right? Nothing is real, or Strawberry Field, nothing is real. Lennon kept on talking about the non-reality of his existence. It wasn't coming from him, though. It wasn't coming from McCartney or any of the other Beatles. They were real. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to have that do that collaboration here on this show. And so you'll want to get notifications of that. It's going to be a good one because we're going to go in on the flat earthers saying the Beatles are controlled, and also a subset of that, which is the Paul is dead people, right? The clickbaiters, that we can address that. And another theme we've talked about is to address the occultism of John Lennon and more likely Yoko Ono. I have some thoughts that I'll put together for that purpose. So that's a preview of coming attractions. We'll, God willing, put that together soon, maybe even over the holidays, right? Because otherwise the holidays are pretty dreary so far as I'm concerned. And I'd love to address some of these characters who are blowing smoke. They might be part of a psyops themselves for all we know, right? That's part of the paranoia that creeps in with this type of work if you're not careful, right? So on that note, enjoy your life and live your life in spite of all the fear mongers. The people have learned to monetize anxiety. We don't need them, right? By now you have your storable foods and you've bought your precious metals, and there's nothing much more that you can do to bug out. Now we will stand and deliver the goods and defeat these son of a guns, or if not defeat definitively, we'll resist them and live our lives at the same time. All right. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. And Christmas is right around the corner, and the new year. And we're looking forward to 2024. Hopefully free of any psyops, but if something emerges, we'll know what it's about because we've been through that. We've assessed it. Oh, that's another coming attraction. I'm going to be probably, I don't know when, I'm not going to predict. I'll be reviewing the latest book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which specifically points the finger at Wuhan as part of our crisis, as let me call it euphemistically, this crisis that was foisted upon us, right? And unfortunately, he has, not unfortunately, I'm glad he was honest about it, but he has admitted to having traveled on the Jeffrey Epstein private aircraft, right? Kind of in a lawyerly fashion, shading it in a way that makes him look less than a creep. That's like, unlike these other characters like Bill Clinton and well, Donald Trump was a passenger as well. And supposedly there's a new list of passengers and of additional names that we didn't have at our disposal before. So it's going to be an exciting 2024. And again, I will conclude by thanking each and every one of you for your support of this channel. All right. Let's see. Oh, I already got that. Got that. Who's going to get the last word? Oh, there's a Thomas Sowell reference. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll see you next week, God willing. Bye.